Members, welcome back. I would invite Kerry to introduce our guest speaker, Dame Suzie.
So members and President, this is a real honour for me today to introduce Dame Suzie, whom I first met in 2005. But I'm going to do a very briefest of introductions, because you'll all have read the profiles in the media, and I don't want to take a minute more of your time than I need to. So 1987, after a pretty hard, desperate to do arts, didn't do it, married, child, in the wilderness for 10 years, an opportunity to showcase some of your vision, 1987 to where we are now, 2016, 58,000 people attending the show. That's phenomenal growth. And when you think it's now a choreographed show, 2 hours, with 350 staff involved, Gisela is the new chief executive. And the other thing is to think that it's come from an art gallery in Nelson. It moved to Wellington. It's already had a tour to Hong Kong. It's currently in Seattle. It's moving to Boston, and hopefully one day there'll be a relationship where you'll realise that huge vision of competitions around the world. It's a great honour to introduce you. And I know we're going to see a little video, and then Dame Suzie will speak to us, and there'll be time for questions at the end.
Well, good afternoon everyone. It's lovely to be with you today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the journey that I've had with World of Wearable Art. The World of Wearable Art is the only show and competition of its kind in the world, and is seen in Wellington by around 60,000 people each show season. Like the costumes themselves, each year a whole new theatrical show is created, and at the end of each show season, that show is packed away, never to be seen again. WOW is best described as a place where fashion and art collide, a journey into a magical, theatrical world of dance, drama, lighting and music, within which extraordinary costumes from around the world are exhibited on the moving body. I started WOW when I was working full-time as a sculptor. My world was one of fantasy and creativity, a peaceful, inspiring world where anything is possible, where the only limit was my imagination, and I loved it with a passion. But to give you the context around this unique concept of WOW, I'll start by telling you how I began. I had a successful exhibition of my work in Wellington, and being more of a creative soul than a businesswoman, I awaited my cheque with bated breath. After selling all my work, I expected to be reasonably rich. Remember, as a full-time artist, my world was one of anything is possible creatively, and I certainly never saw myself as a businesswoman. I had no idea how much it cost to run a business, and no idea that these people running the gallery had overheads, and I was horribly disappointed to find that they'd taken close to 35% of my sales. And it was this experience that drove me to open my own gallery. For many years I'd driven past a quaint, derelict old cob cottage nearby where I lived, and I'd watched it gradually fall into serious disrepair. I decided that this would make the perfect art gallery. It was owned at the time by Bajent Forest Industries, and I went to see the manager to ask if I could buy it. I had no money, but I figured if he said yes, then I'd somehow find it. After much discussion about what I wanted it for, he said they'd recently been approached by the New Zealand Historic Places Trust, asking them to restore it because of its historic significance as one of the oldest cob cottages in New Zealand. Bajents had no need of it, and the end result was that I could have it, and better still, they'd pay for the restoration as long as I helped. So I went out of that meeting, as you can imagine, walking on air. I just could not believe my good fortune. So I formed an artist cooperative, and we set to work. It was a wonderful experience restoring this beautiful old cob cottage, the William Higgins Gallery, named after the pioneer who built it. It opened in 1985, and in 1987, it's a long time ago now, I was looking at ways to help promote this country gallery. It was at this time that I saw an advert for an exhibition in Auckland for art-inspired clothes. I imagined what that could be: amazing sculpture, paintings reinvented as body adornments. It sounded fantastic. So I scraped up enough money to go to Auckland, only to find the exhibits were all pretty hand-painted silk dresses hanging on clothes hangers. I was horribly disappointed, but the seed of an idea was planted, and going home on the plane that day, I made notes on how I could create a truly wearable art event as a promotion for that little country gallery. I had absolutely no idea about event organisation, compliance with council rules, or the business side of running a show. But in the spirit of a true optimist, I decided that as long as it covered its costs, I'd gamble on the rest working out itself. The first step was to find a sponsor to cover the cost of prize money. I started door knocking around Nelson businesses looking for sponsors and found continual rejection. They couldn't see any value in backing an art show, let alone grasp the concept of what I wanted to do, and most were already committed to sports sponsorship. Remember, it was 1987, a time when sports dominated sponsorship and the television screens. The concept of art as worthy of media coverage and audiences, let alone something ordinary people would want to see, was almost unheard of. Add to that an art event created and run largely by women, and it was almost as scandalous as it was impossible. I'd almost given up on finding the sponsored prize money when one day I was having coffee at the Chez Elko Cafe in Nelson, and Elko, the owner, came over and asked me why I was looking so despondent, and I explained what I was trying to do. He went away and came back and handed me a cheque for $1,000. I was so excited. The prize money was now covered, and the Chez Elko became the show's first naming rights sponsor. Family, friends and fellow artists were the ingredients of that first show's success at the William Higgins Gallery in 1987. I rang artist friends to explain the concept and encourage them to enter. I had 3 months to pull the show together. I managed to talk my way into some free advertising and handmade posters and wrote out entry forms and enlisted the help of friends and family. The news spread through word of mouth and we had door sales. The tickets were $10 and to everyone's surprise they all sold. I knew I wanted more than models on a catwalk. But in that first show, it was more about the music and the atmosphere of that magic little old cottage that created the mood. We strung up coloured lights around the veranda and created a catwalk running out into the garden. And then the unexpected happened. It rained. Not just a few drops, but one of Nelson's biggest rainstorms, a once-in-50-year deluge. The budget went out the window as I hastily organised a marquee, and the sun came up just long enough for the tent to be erected, and then down came the torrent again. It was like someone was looking after us to make sure this actually did keep going. So amazingly, people streamed in, 200 of them squelching through the mud with their umbrellas and raincoats. The music burst into life from the borrowed stereo, and the first show was born. The entries were patchy. There were colourful hand-knitted cardies, very much a fashion statement of the 80s, some of you might remember that. And of course the tie-dyed silk dresses. But there were flashes of brilliance, and the hairdressers who had donated their time saved the day by creating outrageous hairstyles. We made no money, but the real success was the profile the promotion created for this small country gallery. Both artist and audience had been captured by the idea of art being translated into the three-dimensional to adorn the body in wildly beautiful and bizarre ways, presented not as a catwalk strut, but an emotionally adventurous show. At that first show, the only toilet we had was a long drop, hardly suitable for over 200 people. I hadn't applied for any consent to hold the event, and the noise that continued as we partied through the night did not go down well with the neighbours, so it wasn't a very good start. I realised then that changes would have to be made, so the following year the show was moved down the road to a new venue, and it was clear from that first event that WOW was more than a one-off show, and people were fascinated by the concept, and those who entered and went to the awards show wanted more. Ideas about how to inspire and more creative entries, where to find models, and how to turn the show into a moving story all flew through my head and onto paper in reams of sketches and notes. The 1988 show built on what I'd started, including a magnificent row of portaloos and better compliance to local council bylaws. This time I worked out the different areas of the awards show and how they could be managed more efficiently. I found cheap and free ways to achieve what I needed to do, and the goodwill even then was amazing. I remember going to the New Zealand Army Depot in Nelson to ask if I could borrow and use some of their tents for changing rooms. They not only delivered them for free, they also set them out for us too. The local power board installed a temporary power box so that I could install a better lighting rig and sound system. So they really became some of WOW's first in-kind sponsors. In 1990, after our second show, its popularity was tested with the move into Nelson's Trafalgar Centre. It was nail-biting and a huge risk. Essentially a sports complex, the venue was totally unsuitable, the acoustics were bad, the layout was like a large aircraft hangar, and the council would not come to the party to help me with the huge cost of hiring their facility. I remember going to the office of the mayor a couple of years later asking for help, and his response was to tell me, and this is the exact words, "Well, girlie, well, girlie, if I were you, I'd take the show out of Nelson." How prophetic that was. But years later, he actually did come and apologise to me. So it was a stressful time. Would I get enough people to pay the increasing number of bills? How many entries would we get? This is before computers were around. You know, you just had to go by the skin of your teeth, quite frankly. And what if we didn't get any entries? It was a time of crazy excitement, and the town was buzzing, and the media inquiries came in from all over New Zealand. And by the third show in the Trafalgar Centre, it was an established success, with all seats sold to a curious, appreciative and widening audience. It was no longer an event for art and fashion lovers alone. Now kids, grannies and country farmers suddenly became some of our most avid showgoers. It really was then that I knew I had something very special. From an operational perspective, I was still grappling with the growing reality that I needed to run the event as a business. For many years, the office was my kitchen table. I was on the DPB, and initially I had to not only provide for my daughter, but I also had to use the income towards the next show, and until the ticket proceeds arrived, to pay the major bills. I delivered my paperwork to the accountant in shoe boxes, and I lived on the proverbial smell of an oily rag, and learnt 101 ways to cook rice. This venture was not about making money, it was, and still is, a passion for art. Each day, I'd mark off lists to be achieved and then make new lists. I guess this was what was called a business plan. I had no idea then that this is what it was. I found a mentor to help me understand the business and trusted my intuition. That inner voice became my guiding light, and failure was not an option. I developed a very thick skin for those times I had the door slammed in my face, or heard that my idea was a bit fruity and wouldn't last. I was driven by those moments, and I had a great desire to prove them all wrong. The more I was told this won't work, the more it drove me to succeed. It was the thrill and challenge of driving an idea that motivated me. If I hadn't taken risks, I doubt I would be standing here before you today. And I did take risks. At one stage, money was so tight, I mortgaged my house to make sure the awards continued. When I look back, it was a huge gamble, but I had absolute faith that this idea was going to work. I could so clearly see the show as it is today, and absolutely nothing was going to shake that. Communication was the key, and I found that it was important to create a culture of passion and the genuine drive for each person to succeed and do their best, and to be proud to be part of my vision. Trust and loyalty to each other and the brand was pivotal to WOW's success, and everyone involved was focused on rowing the boat in the same direction to achieve the goals set before them to that success. I loved to set challenges, taking steps towards climbing that mountain to the end vision. I could see so clearly, and nothing was going to stop me. Many people in those early days worked for absolutely no pay. When I look back at those times, it was a roller coaster, a 7-day-a-week job that totally consumed me. But it was amazing fun, 1 minute flying by the seat of my pants, the next basking in the rave reviews of the audience, artists and media. It was probably one of the most exciting times of my life. The world of wearable art soon outgrew my kitchen table, with the profile growing too. I was able to find a sponsored building to store the entries, judge the garments, and create an art department and set up a real proper office. Over the years, we worked from an empty villa in a psychiatric hospital, a Nelson Wharf building, an orchard pack house, and an old wine shop, working between the sounds of ship sirens, cold drafty rooms, and the ghosts of the mentally ill. As the show grew, the business grew. There were contracts to cover health and safety and employment conditions, and negotiations over the ever-increasing production costs. I didn't have the skills necessary to continue to build the business. My strength was my creative abilities, and with each new show the challenge was for it to be completely different to the previous, both musically and creatively. So my job was to keep things fresh, innovative and exciting. I appointed a general manager who held the managerial and fiscal reins of the company, and I appointed a marketing manager to look at new ways to sustain and grow the business. Removing myself from the day-to-day demands of WOW freed up my time to do what I love best: dreaming up new ideas, working on the music score, planning the creative content of the show, working with my art team, and overseeing the production of the show. WOW is now a business with all the safeguards and management oversight that a growing enterprise needs. The catalyst of the evolution from Wearable Art Awards to the World of Wearable Art, or WOW, as it's known today, came with an out-of-the-blue phone call from a wealthy Nelson family. They asked me if I would like a building for wearable art. I thought they were talking about another old hall or something. I was dumbfounded when they revealed that the building would be architecturally designed They asked me what sort of building would I like. So I told them something like the Guggenheim Museum was the move. They were a fishing company, they'd never heard of that, so I had to explain it to them. And the result was the next best thing. After 17 years of successful shows in Nelson, we had the business looked at by an economist who told us if we stayed where we would die in a few years. Other centres had started copycat shows, and one in particular in Auckland was gathering momentum with big council backing. We took that information to the Nelson City Council as we negotiated an increase in their sponsorship which covered the cost of hiring the Trafalgar Centre. This didn't convince the council that WOW deserved more investment. In fact, they believed council had no business in a private company. The attitude of the Wellington City Council was in stark contrast. Mayor, at the time, Kerry Prendergast, publicly endorsed the value of unique city events, not just in its economic benefits, but in the social benefits, bringing new life to the city. So in a way, our move was like the child that had grown up into a rebellious teenager wanting to leave home and start a new life. Wellington has embraced WOW, for which I am truly very grateful. Our event now delivers around 30 million to Wellington's economy every show season. And this has prompted organisations such as the Ministry of Business and Innovation and Employment to say that not only is WOW a valuable generator of economic activity for the region, but it is also world-class, a world-class demonstration of the New Zealand events industry and what our creative producers are able to achieve. It has also always been my dream to take WOW to the world, and in 2014 our first international exhibition was held at the Auckland War Memorial Museum, showcasing 30 amazing costumes. It then travelled on to Australia, then Hawaii, and in July this year it opened at the EMP Museum in Seattle.